On the night of August 12, 1944, a cold-blooded killer from the Midwest named Leo the Ghost Rossi stepped into Small's paradise in Harlem. Leo had spent years working for the KKK, surviving a world of pure chaos. But tonight, he was about to make a mistake that would end everything. He insulted Bumpy Johnson in front of a packed house of 300 people. Suddenly, the jazz stopped. Bumpy walked across the floor and whispered just 3 short things to the man. Before the final word was even out, the killer's legs gave out, and he dropped to the floor in total terror. Everyone wondered, what could Bumpy have said to break a professional murderer in less than a minute? Back then, Harlem followed a secret code. From one end of the neighborhood to the other, you wouldn't find a single sign explaining the law of the streets. There were no books to read or manuals to study on how to stay alive. Yet every soul who lived or worked there knew the deal perfectly. If you messed up, you found out the hard way very quickly. Small's Paradise sat on 127th Avenue, a massive place that could hold over 600 people when the night was jumping. Legends like Duke Silver and Ella Vance had graced its stage. During the years when alcohol was banned, the bar never ran dry. And after the ban was lifted, it kept flowing like nothing had ever changed. While people danced, more cash moved across those tables than in a city bank. But the music was just a front. The owner, a man named George, ran the spot like a high-security vault. It was a safe zone. This didn't mean Harlem was peaceful. Violence was everywhere. But inside Smalls, things were different. It was the only place where a police chief could grab a beer just feet away from a local bookie. It was a place where church leaders sat by loan sharks, and city leaders laughed with the very men who tried to ruin them. People came there because they needed a spot to make deals in total privacy. In this club, you didn't ask for respect, you just gave it. From the moment you stepped inside, you agreed to the unspoken contract. Talk softly, keep your hands where people can see them, and leave your beef at the door. If you broke those rules, the crowd itself would shut you down before the guards even had to blink. The regulars knew this by heart. A piano player named Arthur, who had been there for 5 years, remembered a night when 2 guys started yelling over a gambling debt. As their voices got loud and they reached for their belts, the band didn't stop, but the atmosphere changed. The doorman moved in, and several big men at other tables stood up quietly. The argument died instantly, ending in a handshake. The room simply forced the problem to go away. The system worked because the powerful people in Harlem needed it to. Politicians needed a place to meet secret donors, and outlaws needed a place to talk shop without the law watching. The neighborhood needed it as proof that some things still worked on honor. That Tuesday night was supposed to be quiet. The club was mostly full, and the house band was playing slow tunes to keep the mood easy. Arthur was on the keys. A man named Oscar was on the door, and the veteran bartender Lou was mixing drinks like a machine. It felt like any other calm night. In the past, the club had handled many threats. Once, when 2 men almost drew guns, the entire room stood up as one to show they were all witnesses. The guns stayed hidden. Another time, a man tried to start an illegal game in the corner, and George simply stared him down until he left. Even loudmouth politicians were quietly escorted out if they got too rowdy. Power here wasn't about shouting. It was about who got the best table and who was allowed to stay. The rule was simple. You could mess up once, but never twice. There were no police logs or official papers about how the club stayed in order. Writing it down would have made it a debate, and there was no debating the rules of Smalls. Everyone remembered what happened to those who forgot. Then, at 11:37 p.m., Leo Rossi walked in like he owned the dirt the building was sitting on. Every inch of the man looked like a Midwestern thug. His shoes were too shiny and too new, the kind meant to scare people before a punch was thrown. His suit was expensive and perfectly pressed, practically shouting how much it cost. He walked with a cocky stride, like a man used to everyone falling silent when he walked through the door. Oscar, the man at the door, figured him out in 2 seconds. An outsider with a nasty resume. Probably a big deal back home, but maybe a nobody here. Oscar let him pass. The stranger, Leo Rossi, moved through the club like he was scouting a house he planned to rob. He checked the stage, the bar, the exits, and the groups of men who looked like they could fight. He had probably done this 1,000 times in a dozen different cities. He grabbed a stool right in the center of the bar where he could see everything and keep his back protected. Lou, the bartender, walked over with his professional, blank face. "What can I get you?" Rossi didn't even look at him. "Whiskey. Straight." Lou poured the drink. Rossi swallowed half of it in one gulp, still scanning the room. Over at the piano, Arthur noticed Lou's posture change. The bartender's shoulders were tight. He was moving carefully, the way people do when they know a bomb might go off. Rossi tapped his glass on the bar. Lou filled it again. "You work here every night?" Rossi asked. "Most nights." "How long?" 27 years. Rossi let out a short, mean laugh. 27 years, serving other people drinks. "That's some wife." Lou said nothing. His face was a mask. He'd heard worse from better men. "What's your name?" Rossi asked. "Lou." "Lou what?" The bartender waited a beat. "Just Lou." Rossi grinned. "Just Lou, huh? I bet you know everyone." "Well, I'm going to be a regular here, so you better make sure you remember my face." Lou nodded once, poured another drink, and walked away. That 90-second talk was all it took. 3 different people in the room knew exactly what was happening. They couldn't hear the words over the music, but they understood the vibe. Rossi was acting like the club belonged to him after only 15 minutes. A regular named Clarice leaned over to her friend. "That man has no idea where he is. He won't last long." Arthur kept playing the piano, but kept his eyes on the bar. He'd seen outsiders like this before. They either learned the Harlem way fast, or they left in a hurry. He had never seen anyone simply refuse to learn at all. The third person watching was sitting in a corner booth with 4 men, playing cards and sipping coffee. He didn't move or react. He just watched and went back to his game. This was Bumpy Johnson. 20 minutes passed. Rossi had finished 3 more whiskeys and started bothering the man sitting next to him. To someone far away, it looked like a friendly chat, but it wasn't. Rossi was leaning in too close, waving his glass around and forcing drinks on the man. The local guy was trying to lean away, politely saying no, but Rossi wouldn't listen. Rossi's voice started getting louder. In Small's paradise, people knew how to keep their business quiet. Rossi didn't care. "I'm telling you," Rossi shouted loud enough for several tables to hear. "Back in Chicago, things are different. If there's a problem, someone fixes it fast. No waiting around." The man next to him nodded and tried to stand up. "Hold on." Rossi's hand slammed onto the man's shoulder. It wasn't a punch, but it was heavy. "I'm not done talking." The man sat back down. He had no choice. "Chicago doesn't play," Rossi continued. "You know who I worked for? The KKK. You heard of them? I was the one who went out and got the money people owed. Sometimes they paid up. Sometimes I had to convince them. Either way, I always got the cash." Lou moved closer to that end of the bar. He didn't say anything. He just stood there. Rossi noticed him. "Something wrong, Lou?" "No, sir." "You look stressed. Just do your job." "My job is pouring drinks." "Then pour." Lou poured. The whole room was listening now. No one stared, but the whispers at the tables stopped. The dancers started moving toward the walls. Arthur lowered the volume of the piano. Rossi kept going. "You know what's wrong with a place like this? No order. No one in charge. Everyone just doing whatever. That's a mess. You need someone to make the rules." The man on the stool tried to leave again, but Rossi's grip tightened. "I'm talking to you." "I hear you," the man muttered. "Then stay put." Lou stepped in. "Sir, if he needs to go." "He's not my friend," Rossi snapped. "We're just talking. And we aren't finished." Oscar, the doorman, started walking over from the front. He didn't run. He just walked steady and calm. Rossi saw him coming. "What's this? You need help to pour a drink now?" Oscar stopped a few feet away. "No trouble, sir. Just making sure everyone is happy." "I'm great," Rossi said, raising his glass to Lou. "Great bartender. Professional. 27 years. That's real focus. He paused and sneered. Or maybe you're just too dumb to do anything else. The music stopped. Not slowly, but all at once. The drummer went silent. The bass stopped. The horns went down. Arthur took his hands off the keys. Total silence. 200 people, and not a single sound. Only the faint memory of the song remained in the air. Rossi looked around, confused by the sudden drop in noise. What happened? Nobody said a word. He turned back to Lou. "What's wrong with your band?" The bartender stood like a statue and kept his mouth shut. Rossi looked at the guy sitting next to him, but that man was staring intensely at the wood of the bar, as if his life depended on it. "What?" Rossi's voice sounded way too loud in the quiet room. "What did I even say?" In the far corner, a chair dragged across the floor. The sound was slow and purposeful. Bumpy Johnson stood up and began walking toward the bar. In that moment, everyone knew how this would end. It was like a math problem the room had solved 100 times before. A rule is broken. The room goes quiet. A man stands up. The ending is always the same. This wasn't just a lack of noise. It was the heavy weight of 200 people watching a single man walk. Bumpy didn't rush. He moved like someone who knew time belonged to him. He was in his 50s, average height, and dressed in a plain dark suit and a crisp white shirt. He didn't carry a weapon and had no visible scars. He looked like an ordinary businessman, but the way the room reacted told a different story. 4 men stood up at his table. They didn't follow him. They just stood there to be noticed. Arthur recognized most of them, longtime associates who handled Bumpy's business in the streets. They were men who knew that while violence was loud, silence was a much scarier message. Bumpy reached the bar. Rossi still had his hand clamped on the local man's shoulder. The Chicago part of Rossi's brain told him this was just a local tough guy trying to look big. The part of his brain meant for survival told him to run. He ignored his instincts. That was his second mistake. "Can I help you?" Rossi asked. Bumpy looked at the man Rossi was holding. "You can go now." The man stood up, his stool scraped the floor, and he vanished into the crowd. Rossi's hand stayed in the air, gripping nothing. "That was pretty rude," Rossi said. "Was it? I was talking to him." "You were," Bumpy agreed quietly. "Do I know you?" "No." "Then maybe you have no idea who you're messing with," Rossi sneered. "I know exactly who you are," Bumpy said, his voice low and steady. "Leo Rossi, Chicago. You did dirty work for the KKK until the early 30s. Since then, you've been a freelancer. Small-time jobs, nothing special." Rossi's expression shifted. He realized someone had done their homework. "You've been asking questions about me." "I didn't have to. You aren't a hard man to find out about. And you aren't important." Rossi gave a mean, narrow smile. "If I'm not important, then we're done talking." "Are we?" Bumpy asked. Lou the bartender stopped moving entirely. He wasn't frozen because he was scared. He was frozen because he knew a sentence was about to be passed. "Look, pal," Rossi said, trying to sound casual. "I'm just having a drink. If I stepped on some toes, I'm sorry, but I don't fight over nothing. You think this is nothing? A misunderstanding." Bumpy stayed silent for 3 seconds, letting the quiet get under Rossi's skin. Then, Rossi made his third mistake. He reached for his inner jacket pocket. He wasn't fast or aggressive. He was just trying to show he was carrying a gun to regain some control. He never got to finish the move. One of Bumpy's men moved his hand toward his own coat. Another stepped forward where he could be clearly seen. Oscar, the doorman, moved to block the exit. The room understood immediately. Rossi was being given a choice, and if he chose wrong, he wouldn't make it to the sidewalk. "Take your hand away," Bumpy said. Rossi did it slowly, placing both hands flat on the bar. "Thank you," Bumpy said. Later on, people would argue about the exact time or the specific words used, but no one argued about the sight of those hands on the bar. The power in the room had shifted so fast you could feel the air change. The man who had walked in acting like he owned Harlem was now waiting for permission just to breathe. "I'm going to tell you something," Bumpy said, "and you are going to listen. Not because I'm making a threat, but because you walked into a house you don't understand, and broke rules you didn't know were there. Now you're going to learn them." Rossi nodded, looking small. "Chicago taught you how to collect cash and scare people," Bumpy continued. "That worked there. In Chicago, you get respect because of your name, your past, or your threats," Bumpy said. He paused for a beat. "But you aren't in Chicago." Lou the bartender later mentioned that this was the exact moment he knew the situation was over. It wasn't just Bumpy's words. It was the way everyone in the club reacted to the things he didn't say. You can fight a threat or trade punches with a bully, but you can't fight a lesson given without anger. You either take the lesson or you don't, and in this room, saying no wasn't an option. "You've made 3 errors," Bumpy continued. "I'm going to tell you what they are, not because I want an apology or because I want you to be afraid, but because you need to understand where you went wrong." Clarice whispered to her friend, "Everyone is watching. He's going to make him say he's sorry. He might even make him get on his knees." "Give him another drink," Bumpy told Lou. Lou poured it with a hand that didn't shake. "Drink it." The visitor took a hard swallow of the whiskey. "First error," Bumpy said. "You walked in here like you bought the place. That told everyone here you don't understand Harlem. This isn't your house. This is neutral ground kept in order by discipline. When you step through that door, you agree to rules that have nothing to do with cash or where you came from." The man from out of town listened. He was finally paying attention to the information that might save his life. "Second error. The way you talked to Lou. He's been at this bar for 27 years. He's served every important person in this city. He knows secrets that could destroy lives and entire businesses. You insulted him in his own home. You told everyone here that you think hard work doesn't deserve respect." Lou stood a little taller as Bumpy spoke. "Third error. Reaching for your coat. That told me you think problems are only solved with guns. It told me you have no idea where you are. In Chicago, maybe that gets you what you want. Here, it gets you buried before you can even touch your holster." The 4 associates hadn't moved an inch. They didn't need to. Bumpy's voice never got loud or mean. He sounded like a teacher explaining a simple truth. "Now you have a choice. Leave Harlem tonight and never come back. Go home and tell your people there was a misunderstanding. That's the smart move. Keep your name in a place where it still means something." Bumpy paused. "Or you can stay. You can try to prove a point. You can tell yourself you were insulted and need to fight back. You can convince yourself that going home empty-handed is worse than staying here. But that would be your 4th error, and it would be your last." The visitor was sweating now. He finally realized he wasn't the toughest man in the room. "I didn't come here looking for a fight," he finally muttered. "I know," Bumpy replied. "Someone told you Harlem was a mess and there was money to be made." "Who told you that?" The man hesitated. In his world, you never gave up a name. But he wasn't in his world anymore. Frankie M. Bumpy's eyes showed he knew the name. "Frankie doesn't know this neighborhood as well as he thinks. You mentioned the KKK earlier. You used that name like it was supposed to scare me. I know who they are." Bumpy's voice finally had a sharp edge to it. "They built power on noise and making a scene. That works until the law puts you away. Harlem is different. Power here isn't about being loud. It's about making sure the right things stay quiet. The second you have to tell someone you're the boss, you've already lost. You walked in tonight thinking this place wasn't worth learning about. You said I made 3 errors," the man said, his voice much smaller now. "What do I have to do?" "That's the right question," Bumpy said. Around the room, the regulars knew what was coming next. In Small's paradise, if you broke the code, you had to fix it in front of everyone. Your first error insulted this room. You treated it like a place you could just take over. That affects every person sitting here. So every person here needs to see you fix it. Your second error insulted Lou. He's more than a bartender. He's a pillar of this community. That apology needs to be personal. Bumpy made a small motion with his hand. The four men moved closer to the bar, surrounding the stranger. Oscar stood firmly in front of the exit. Arthur sat still at the piano, watching as a witness. 200 people leaned forward, becoming an audience to the lesson. Your third error was reaching for your gun. That told me you don't know the difference between fear and respect. Fear is what people feel when they think you'll hurt them. Respect is what they give when they know you won't unless you have to. Now, here is how this ends. You will stand up, face the crowd, and apologize. Not to me, but to everyone. For disrespecting their home. For insulting Lou. For trying to bring your outside rules here. If you don't, you'll be leaving this club in a way you won't like. It wasn't a threat, it was just the truth. After you apologize to the room, you'll apologize to Lou specifically. Then you'll choose, walk out that door and forget this ever happened, or stay and try to be a tough guy. I'd suggest the first one. Do you understand? Silence took over for 10 long seconds. Yes, the man whispered. Say it back. I apologize to the room. I apologize to Lou. I leave. Good, Bumpy said, stepping back. The man stood up slowly. His legs were visibly shaking. He turned around to face the 200 silent people watching him. I'm sorry, he said. I came in here acting like I owned something I didn't. I disrespected your home and your rules. I was wrong. No one moved or made a sound. He turned back toward Lou. I shouldn't have talked to you that way. You've worked here longer than I've been doing anything important. You deserve better. I am sorry, Rossi whispered. Lou nodded just once. It was a small gesture, but it meant the apology was accepted. Rossi turned his gaze to Bumpy. Is that enough? Can I go? You have one more task, Bumpy replied. Rossi waited, his heart thumping against his ribs. You are going to get on your knees, Bumpy commanded. Not for my sake, not even for Lou's. You are doing it for every single person in this building. Everyone who saw you strut in here like a king needs to see you admit you were wrong. That way, the next time some tough guy from the Midwest thinks he can bring that attitude to Harlem, he'll remember this story. He'll hear about the night Leo Rossi knelt at Small's Paradise. Ross's face turned ghostly white. Kneeling was a different level of shame. He could lie about an apology later, but kneeling was a physical act that couldn't be denied. It was the kind of thing that killed a man's reputation forever. I can't do that, Rossi stammered. You can, Bumpy said firmly. Or you can choose the other way. But if you do, it will be the last choice you ever make. Willie's hand shifted toward his coat. James stepped into the light, and Oscar stayed firm at the exit. The mysterious fourth man took 2 steps closer, lining himself up with Rossi. Rossi looked around the room, begging for a way out, but he found only stony faces. 200 people were waiting to see justice. Slowly, his legs gave out. Rossi dropped to the floor of Small's Paradise. He stayed there on both knees, head bowed low in front of everyone. No one cheered or laughed. There was no mocking. This wasn't a show. It was the neighborhood fixing a broken gear. It was the system restoring itself. Stand up, Bumpy said. Go to the door. Get out of this city and don't ever come back. If I find out you're still in Harlem by sunrise, we will have a very different talk. Rossi stood up, his legs shaking so hard he could barely walk. He shuffled toward the exit. The door opened, then clicked shut. Leo Rossi was gone. For 5 seconds, the room stayed quiet. Then, Arthur's fingers hit the piano keys again. A single chord rang out, and the rest of the band jumped back in. The music filled the air once more. People started talking. Dancers hit the floor, and the bar kept serving. Small's Paradise was back to normal. No bullets had been fired, and no blood had been spilled. Just 3 errors explained, 1 hard choice, and a man's pride shattered on the floorboards. Rossi entered as a collector for the KKK. He left as a man who had knelt in Harlem. That distinction was everything. Rossi walked out at 12:43 a.m. He headed north, not running, just trying to look like a normal person while his entire world crumbled inside. Oscar watched him vanish into the dark and went back to his post. Officially, nothing had happened. There were no cops and no crime reports. To the law, it was just a Tuesday. But everyone in that room knew the truth. Arthur finished his set at 2 a.m. A few people thanked him, shaking his hand a little firmer than usual, with eye contact that said they had all shared a moment. Lou worked until 4 a.m., and his tip jar was overflowing. The extra money was the neighborhood's way of showing respect. Clarice left around 1 a.m. Her friend whispered, "Did that really just happen?" "It happened," Clarice said. "I've never seen anything like that." "You won't again. That's the whole point." By the time the sun came up, the news was traveling through Harlem. It wasn't just gossip. It was vital information. It told everyone how business was to be done and how respect was to be shown. Different groups focused on different parts of the story. The musicians talked about how the silence was used as a weapon. The businessmen talked about how Bumpy handled it without getting the police involved. The bartenders talked about Lou being defended. The street guys talked about how 4 men controlled a whole room without moving a muscle. By the next day, the news reached the Midwest. Frankie M. heard 3 different versions, and they all said the same thing. Rossi had insulted the wrong people and ended up on his knees. Frankie made some calls to check the facts. Everyone told him it was true, and that it was even more intense than the rumors suggested. Rossi was gone. He had caught the first train out of town. Rossi stopped talking. When people back home asked how New York went, he just said it didn't work out. If they pushed for details, he walked away. If they kept at it, he flew into a rage. His silence told the whole story. 3 weeks later, a man named Arthur Ree from Detroit was planning a trip to Harlem to find new business. At a bar, he heard the story of Leo Rossi, the night the KKK's enforcer was forced to his knees at Small's Paradise. Arthur Ree canceled his trip. This happened again and again. Men heard about Harlem, made plans to take over, then heard about Rossi and stayed home. Not everyone stayed away, but those who came were much more careful. They realized Harlem wasn't up for grabs. Everyone knew about Small's Paradise now. They knew the new rules didn't involve the police. They involved a shame so deep your reputation could never recover. Inside the neighborhood, the effects were permanent. Bumpy didn't necessarily get more powerful. He was already at the top, but the way he used his power became clear. It wasn't about the threat of a gun. It was about keeping order. It was the power of a man who could end a fight just by explaining why the other guy was wrong. That kind of power is impossible to beat. How do you fight someone who makes you look like a fool in public? You've already lost. Small's Paradise changed too. It had always been neutral ground, but after that October night, that neutrality was protected by everyone. People treated the club with more care, aware that they were guests. The invisible rules became visible and respected by all. Lou worked 12 more years before retiring in 1964. The club threw him a massive party with 200 guests. Arthur sat at the piano and played "Take the A Train," the same song that was playing when Rossi walked in, and the same one that played after he left. No one mentioned why they chose that song. They didn't have to. Years passed, and the story became part of Harlem's history. Not as a tall tale, but as a lesson. When Bumpy died in 1968, thousands came to his funeral. The papers wrote big headlines, but the people at Small's Paradise remembered the things the news missed. Bumpy's true strength wasn't in flashy violence. It was built on quiet nights that never made the news, where problems were solved with words and order was kept through respect. The bartenders and musicians made sure to tell the next generation about October 14, 1952. It was their way of teaching how real power works. Leo Rossi became a legend, but not a hero. He was the example of what happens when you think your rules apply everywhere. His story traveled far, changing how people acted and stopping fights before they ever started. Small's Paradise finally closed its doors in 1986. The building is still there, housing a different business now, but people who know the history still think of that Tuesday night in 1952. They think about the moment the music died and a man's knees hit the floor. They remember the night a Midwestern killer learned the difference between being feared and being respected. The lesson wasn't about violence. It was about the weight of your actions. It was about understanding that every room has its own rules and its own people to enforce them. Harlem kept that memory alive in the bars, in the warnings given to newcomers, and in the quiet way people speak on certain street corners. There is a big difference between owning a room and knowing whose room you are standing in. There is a difference between a name built on scaring people and a name built on discipline. October 14th, 1952, Small's Paradise, 200 witnesses, one man on his knees, 0 bullets fired. That was the night Harlem taught the outsiders how things work uptown. It was the night respect proved to be more powerful than a gun. Leo Rossi walked into that club as a debt collector for the KKK. He walked out on his knees. The band was playing again before he even reached the sidewalk. By 1 a.m., the room looked like nothing had happened, but everything was different. By November, every major city knew Harlem was not a place to play games. Trips were canceled, and blood was saved from being spilled without a single punch thrown. Whether every word of the story is perfectly accurate or shaped by time, the result was real. People changed. The respect stuck. Bumpy Johnson passed away decades ago, but those who were there never forgot his most effective move. 3 mistakes explained, 1 choice given, and 200 pairs of eyes watching.